Hey folks, Rob Ager here of collativelearning.com with some thoughts on the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, or more specifically, some thoughts on the Amber Heard testimony that we got last week. A lot of people are talking about this, and normally I don't make videos or write articles about whatever the current big stories in the news media are of the day, because the coverage is typically split into extreme biases to one side or the other. And of course, I think that's happening with this case as well. But I think it was about 2 years ago, I made a video about the Michael Jackson Leaving Neverland documentary, specifically about the body language of the accusers in that documentary. And that video did really well, got a lot of really good feedback from it. Did a couple of other videos about the same documentary. And yeah, this one I think is a good one to cover because being that everybody's interested in this case at the moment, it's a great opportunity to explore some body language, psychology issues, some stuff about verbal expression, things like that. I like to explore these things, and you know, this is a case that is ripe for that kind of study. In other words, I'm not coming down on this from a being a fan of Johnny Depp or of Amber Heard, or from being a hater of either of them. I actually don't know a hell of a lot about the personal histories of either of these actors. Of course, I know Johnny Depp has been a big star for a long time. He's done a few movies that I really liked. He's done some movies that I really didn't like, and some of them I just turned off partway through because I thought they were boring. I've always found him kind of likable. But, you know, how much do you know about a film star and their personality? It's difficult to say, isn't it? Amber Heard, I didn't even know who the hell she was before this trial. Apparently she's done a variety of movies, but I'm not familiar with them. So I've seen some of the news media coverage on this trial, and I stopped looking at the coverage because I thought, hold on, wait, I don't want to get my views on this to be skewed by the existing coverage and interpretations. And I don't want to go watching other YouTubers' takes on this. I just want to have my own response to the Amber Heard testimony. I did have a look at the Johnny Depp stuff, his testimony and his cross-examination, and I thought he did okay. I didn't get the lie detector alarm bells with him. I didn't see a lot of overacting or anything like that. The Amber Heard testimony I found really fascinating. And also I've noticed both in online discussion and in some of the news media coverage of this case, people who have a gender agenda are often using this case. People who hate men want to find Johnny Depp to be the bad guy and Amber Heard to be the victim, and people who see things the other way round have the opposite form of bias, where, you know, they want Depp to be the angel who is guilty of nothing, and he's just a big victim of this complete narcissist called Amber Heard. I hear this word narcissist being thrown around a lot. It's a very popular word these days, but I don't really like throwing labels at people. I try to avoid it. It's very hard to do. I don't like political labels. I don't like labels such as narcissist and things like that, because I think people are too complex for that kind of labeling. I mean, you can even take like your average psychopathic killer, and that person will not just be a psychopathic killer. You know, they will have a history. They'll have a whole history of things that have gone on in their lives that are nothing to do with psychopathic killing. So I try and take people for the complex, unique beings that they are, instead of just trying to stick a few simple labels on them and leaving it at that. So I'm going to try and come at this from a very sort of as neutral a point of view as I can. What I'm interested in is how credible do I find Amber Heard's testimony, not relating to the actual evidence in the case. I haven't seen any court documents. I haven't looked at any of the documented evidence in the case. I don't even know where I would get hold of that stuff. I'm just looking at Amber Heard's delivery of her testimony at face value. So this is definitely not a legal professional view on this. I have experienced defamation cases myself. I was sued for defamation once, and I defended and my opponent quit their case. On another occasion, I sued 3 parties for defamation and they all settled the case. So I've got some experience with defamation, but I'm definitely not any kind of expert in it. So this isn't going to be a prediction of how this case is going to work out. It's just the credibility of the testimony that I'm interested in. All right, so I've took a ton of notes here, and I believe that the cross-examination of Amber Heard is due early next week. And there's so much footage here. I mean, I think I watched about 3 hours worth of the Amber Heard testimony. I think it's posted in 5 parts on one of the YouTube channels. Law and Crime Network channel has Amber Heard's testimony posted, and I think it's 5 parts, and they're about an hour and a half each. I only watched the first 2, not realising there was 5 parts. So I haven't watched them all. I'm just going by the first 2 parts. Normally, with a thing like this, like I did with Leaving Neverland, I would take the time to watch the entire thing and really go into it. But because the cross-examination of Amber Heard is going to happen next week, I want to get this video done faster because I think it'd be interesting as a personal experiment for me to give my breakdown of what I think's going on with Amber Heard in the testimony, and then see what happens in the cross-examination afterwards. So I'm kind of putting myself on the line by doing that, and that's fine. You know, I'm not claiming to know what's going on in this case. So just some thoughts. All right, so I took a ton of notes in those the first 3 hours worth of footage that I watched, and I've gone through those notes and highlighted some things. So I'll go through them and I'll briefly explain the basic notes that I took. Oh, one other thing before we do start. As far as I know, any court case, before a person gets in the witness box to give their testimony, they have to give a written witness statement. And then when they get in the witness box, they explain the contents of that written statement in more detail, and they get cross-examined. Now, I haven't seen the written witness statements from Amber Heard or Johnny Depp in this trial. I don't even know if they're publicly available. I think I had a quick look online and I couldn't find them, but it would be really interesting to look at Amber Heard's written witness statement, if she's actually made one. I don't know if your courts in America work in the same way as what I've experienced here in Britain, but if she has made a written witness statement, it would be very interesting to compare the testimony footage to that. Okay, now the first thing is that as this trial has gone on, I've watched bits and pieces of it. I've been interested to see how both Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, how they appear, what their demeanour is when they are not in the witness box. What they look like when they're just sitting listening to the lawyers doing their arguments and the judge talking to the lawyers and so on. And Amber Heard seemed, from what I've seen, I mean, I haven't watched all of the footage of it, but she seemed pretty calm and laid back, and didn't seem particularly traumatized by sitting there listening to this case go on. I mean, even when there's been, I think it was a psychotherapist, some sort of therapist was a witness and was describing what she perceived to be, sort of bad personality traits that Amber Heard had. Even when that was happening, Amber Heard just seemed to be sat there and calm about it. She didn't look traumatized or anything like that. So I think that's an important point to start with. And when she walks up and gets into the witness box, she looks fairly calm, but there's a detectable nervousness there that I think would be there for anybody who gets in the witness box. I mean, whether you're guilty of something or not, whether you've done anything wrong or not, it's kind of a public speaking situation, and especially she ought to be nervous about doing this, regardless of whether she's done anything wrong or not. Because, I mean, the whole world's watching the case. I mean, how could you not be nervous? So I thought that she kept very, very calm, strong composure before going into the witness box and as she gets into the witness box. But you can see some nervousness coming through. There's a little bit of chin quivering and a little bit of anxiety in the voice. In particular, there's some tightness of the mouth. When people sort of kind of like do this, it's kind of like they want to say something, but they're closing their mouth and tightening their mouth so that they can't. Sometimes that's the reason people do it. And sometimes it's a general expression of tension, anxiety, nervousness. So that's all understandable. That doesn't say anything about how truthful she's being. At least I don't think it does. Okay, so she seems pretty calm and in control until she gets asked by her own legal counsel, I think it was, who was asking her the questions in this initial testimony. And she's asked, how do you feel about being sued? And Amber Heard, she starts to say that she struggles to find the words for how painful this is. But she takes her time saying it. And as she does take her time saying it, she seems to build it. She tries to build into some emotion. I got the impression that she was trying to build up the appearance of pain and was taking her time answering the question so that she could build up that appearance of pain. Whereas when people are really traumatized or in pain over an issue, they don't have to take the time to build it up. It often kicks in very, very quickly. And this is something that I've noticed seems to happen a lot throughout her testimony. Now, she talks about how it's horrible for me to sit here for weeks with this trial. Well, that doesn't really say anything about the case at all or about who's guilty of what. Nobody would want to sit there through a trial like that, whether they've done something wrong or not. So that doesn't really say anything. Okay, now, here's quite an interesting aspect of it for me. When she sat in that witness box, something that really stood out to me was her makeup. The dark red makeup on the cheeks at the sides almost makes her look like she's got like a slight bruising to her face. I'm not saying she's done that deliberately. I don't know what kind of makeup she normally wears in interviews generally over the years, but it was just something that stood out to me during the testimony. Whether it was intended or not, to me, it gave almost like a subliminal impression of her being like bruised, or at the very least of being in pain or embarrassed or something like that. You know, people blush and their cheeks flush. It's just a weird little observation. Yeah, I mean, in the first like 10 minutes of testimony, and you know, there's points where she's scrunching her face up a bit as if she's on the verge of crying, but I don't see any actual tears come. And if you check out the video that I did on the Michael Jackson Leaving Neverland accusers, that video really breaks down the difference between genuine trauma victims and people who are faking it, you know, pretending to have a traumatic memory, which I would bet my life on it that those two guys in the Leaving Neverland were making it up. So if you go and watch that video, I'll leave the link in the description below there. That one really goes into that kind of detail. I don't want to repeat too much of that here. But yeah, there's certain types of aspects of expressed trauma that are easier to act than others. And the heavy breathing tends to be easier to act. And Amber Heard seems to do that a lot. And the scrunching up of the eyes and the mouth, and that's easier to do. But some of the things that are harder to manufacture as an actor, such as the eyes welling up on their own, such as the repeated gulps in the throat, which are often unconscious and involuntary, and a sort of intense quivering of the chin, and a rapid anxiety in the breath. These things, especially when they're in combination, are much harder to act. And I find that those things tend to be missing in Amber Heard's testimony. Okay, let's go on to some of her verbal descriptions. Early in her testimony, she's asked about her testimony in a previous court case, which was Johnny Depp versus the Sun newspaper, I believe it was, on defamation. And if I remember rightly, I wrote down the quote here. She says, quote, "Up until this point, the hardest thing I've ever had to do," end quote. Now, what's an interesting thing about that statement for me is she says it's the hardest thing she's ever had to do, but yet she's going to go on in this testimony to talk about all kinds of supposed abuse that she's been through. And surely going through all that supposed abuse including apparently being raped by a bottle. I don't think I've even gotten to that footage yet, but apparently she accuses Johnny Depp of that. And having a forced cavity search, that was one clip that I saw. She claims throughout her testimony to have gone through all these things and being hit again and again and threatened and so on. And yet she says very early in the testimony that giving her testimony in the Johnny Depp versus the Sun case was the hardest thing she ever had to do. Just to me, it contradicts with all the reported traumas. I mean, surely those things would be more difficult. Okay, so what else we got here? Yeah, she gets asked a really strange question. I believe she's asked by her own legal team about the breaking in of horses when she was younger, and she, worked with horses and rode horses and all that kind of thing. And she's asked about that. Not that I can see that has any relevance to the case at all. But she's asked about what kind of things that involves, and she says, not show fear, be tough, be calm. Now, what was the point of that being in the testimony? I got the impression that the point of that was to try and make her out to be a sort of a martyr who doesn't show fear and is tough and calm. Also, her hairstyle, she's got her hair is tucked back over her ear on the right side, where I believe that the jury are over on her right side. And she turns and looks at them and smiles at them and talks. And I think her lawyer actually asks her at times, can you tell the jury this, this and this? So she'll turn to the jury. So her hair is back over the side so the jury can see her face and can see whatever trauma she might be going through. But then having the hair down hung on the other side kind of makes her look like dishevelled, like maybe she's a little bit roughed up, and could even be possibly hiding her expressions away from the judge. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much on that, but the hair thing was an interesting part of the testimony. Coming past the 11-minute mark in the video, she's talking about going to Hollywood when she was 17 years old and being alone and struggling and in poverty. I don't know how true that is, but it kind of portrays her as a victim already. Even though Johnny Depp hasn't been brought into the equation, she's being presented as a sort of a vulnerable figure, open to abuse, maybe. That seemed to be the implication. Visual memory, eye access and cues. I talked in the Michael Jackson video about eye access and cues. There's this thing, I don't want to go too much into it because you could spend ages on this subject, but when you ask somebody to remember something, a visual memory, most people, their eyes will move up and to their left, not to your left, to their left, to access a memory. If you ask someone to visualize something that they've never actually experienced for real, their eyes tend to move up to the right. Apparently 5% of people have got it swapped the other way around, and it tends to be people whose left and right hemispheres are swapped the other way around. Apparently it's usually left-handers who have that. But as Amber Heard is asked about her history of going to Hollywood, her personal background, and she's not being asked about Johnny Depp yet, I noticed that most of her eye access and cues are visual memory up and to her left. Yeah? Which indicates to me that she really is talking about actual memories, things that apparently really happened, or at least her brain has got them coded as actual memories. And that's important because later on in the video, I'm not going to go on about this too much, but I'll just mention it for now that you can look out for. In some of the moments where she describes apparent abuse, I've noticed that there's a bit of a tendency toward right side eye access and cues, which would suggest that it's imaginary. Now, I've jumped ahead past a lot of stuff where it's just talking about her personal background. And in I've got here at 43 minutes in, it might be a little bit after that. She's talking about Johnny Depp having a love of knives and guns and giving her some daggers as gifts. And she says that she had Until Death engraved on one of the knives. I don't think she said that Johnny Depp had it engraved. She said that she had it engraved. That's a weird sort of thing to do. Doesn't prove anything, but it seems to suggest that she's got a little bit of a dark side as much as he has. Yeah, around about 50 minutes in to part one of the testimony, about 53 minutes in, She describes Johnny objecting to a dress that she wore publicly and saying, sort of implying that she looked like a whore or something like that, and saying that's how the world is going to remember you, looking like a whore. I can't remember the exact quotes, but it's there around the 53-minute mark. And it really did look like she was trying to do fake crying as she explained this. And to me, that doesn't seem like something that she ought to be crying about now. I mean, a lot of the events that she's describing are well over 10 years ago. And then a minute later, she's talking about, she looks like she's trying to look tearful, but I don't see any actual tears. She's talking about him throwing a wine glass and saying he flips back and forth between being violent and then loving. And I mean, I'll just show you the footage. To me, it looked over-exaggerated, and I think at one point she actually laughs during it as well. Okay, at the 56-minute mark, I mentioned at the start of this video that when it comes to describing traumas, she often seems to take her time to build into it, as if trying to build up the emotion. And that certainly seems to happen around about the 56-minute mark in the video, where she's asked about the first time that Johnny Depp apparently hit her. So I'll just show a quick bit of that. Okay, and she spends a fair bit of time going into detail about this supposed first hitting event. She talks about... Now, this is the weird thing. I find it really hard to visualize several of these abuse events in terms of the physicality. The way she describes the physicality often doesn't make sense to me, and I find it hard to actually make a sort of running movie in my head of what happened. I mean, a good testimony of a past event, a violent event, it should result in the jury, the judge, or anybody else who listens to it having a sort of a clear, sort of a mental movie in their head that would kind of match the physicality of what really happened in the actual event. But I couldn't get that from several of the descriptions she gives. And especially I couldn't get it with this first one where she talks about being sat next to Johnny on the couch. Well, she describes being sat next to him, and then she describes that, oh no, I wasn't. I was sat on the edge of the couch, and she says that she insulted the tattoo that he had, and then he slapped her. Now, I was trying to visualize this because she doesn't explain the physicality of it. She doesn't actually act out what happened in any way. I mean, as she describes it, like if she sat next to him there, and let's say Johnny Depp's where I am, and she insults him about the tattoo, what, does he sort of go like that? You know, it's if you sat next to somebody, it's kind of hard to slap them properly, you know. And then she describes getting slapped another couple of times, but she doesn't describe getting up. She seems to talk about it as if she was still sat next to him, and he slapped her, and then she laughed because she didn't know how to react, and then he slapped her again. And I'm trying to get my head around how he did this slapping. So I couldn't really get my head around that, and then I couldn't understand when she was talking about being sat there traumatized after being slapped a couple of times, and I think she says it was 3 times. And she talks about staring at the carpet and realising how dirty the carpet was, which is a weird thing to say about the memory. It was almost like she was trying to force some sensory detail into the description to make it seem like a real event, but describing the dirty carpet just seemed like the most inappropriate thing to talk about. I mean, I can't get my head around, did he slap her twice on the couch? Or a 3rd time, and then she fell off the couch and landed on the floor, and then she was sat on the floor like a baby staring at the carpet and seeing how dirty it was. I can't understand the physicality of what she's describing. It'd be interesting to see about the cross-examination on that particular event, if it gets tackled directly. And then around about 59.5 minutes into that first testimony video, she's continuing describing that particular event. And she says, quote, "The worst thing has just happened to me that could possibly happen to you," end quote. The language there is weird. Well, first of all, the worst thing that has just happened to me. But her testimony carries on, and she describes increasingly traumatic events. So how can this one be the worst thing just happened? when there's worse things to come. And she also said earlier in the testimony that her giving a testimony for the Johnny Depp versus the Sun case, she said that was the worst experience she ever had, the most painful. So it just seems like this idea of whatever she's experienced in a particular abuse situation, it's always the worst thing. Quote, "The worst thing has just happened to me that could possibly happen to you." End quote. Weird language. It's almost like bad Hollywood script writing or something. Shortly after that, or it might have been just before, she says, "I wish so much he'd said he was joking." And that is in reference to being slapped on that first ever occasion of being slapped. "I wish so much he'd said he was joking." No, doesn't work for me, that. But then she says that the slap, quote, "didn't physically hurt me." And then she goes on about looking at the dirty carpet. If it didn't physically hurt her, then it doesn't sound like she got knocked off of the couch. I mean, if a slap knocks somebody over, that's going to be a pretty hard slap. So if it didn't hurt her, then it almost certainly didn't knock her down. But then she's talking about how she's wondering how I wound up on this carpet. So yeah, again, physically doesn't make sense. Now, if she is lying about this particular event, and I do think she is, it could be a real event that she's altered it in her imagination in order to turn it into something abusive, then she has the double challenge in the witness box of creating the sense of emotional trauma, you know, the fake crying and that kind of thing. And at the same time, she has to come up with descriptions of the event verbally that make sense. And it's hard to do both of those two things at the same time. And so I think at times the verbal description really fails. And so she starts talking about how much time she was apparently sat there or lay there, whichever it was, on this carpet. And she's trying to talk about that, and then she just switches to an extremely simplistic statement. "He just hit me." That's approximately 1 hour into the footage. It gives me the impression that she's almost trying to write a script in her head. She's trying to act a script that she's writing in her head at the same time. That's a tough thing to do, unless she'd thoroughly rehearsed all of this stuff in advance. But it doesn't even come off as strongly rehearsed either, which is a strange contradiction because, a person who's had a real trauma, it shouldn't come off as rehearsed in that situation either. But if she had rehearsed this, so that her descriptions were more accurate and then she could concentrate on the acting in the witness box, that probably, I think, might have worked better in her favour. Again, it sounds like I'm just assuming that she's lying about all this, but like I say, these could be real events and she's changed them a little bit in her mind to make it into something else, but it really doesn't come across as truthful to me. Yeah, and then she didn't really look too upset as she was talking about the supposed physical violence. But then when she's asked to describe how she felt afterwards about the physical violence, then she starts to look more traumatised. And then she's talking about Johnny Depp apparently starting to cry, and he grabs her hard and he says, "I'll never do that again. I'll put the monster away." And he's on his knees. Again, this sounds like bad script writing. "I'll put the monster away." I mean, I've known people who've been in abusive relationships and stuff. I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about it in that way. "I'll put the monster away." It sounds like something out of a corny horror movie or something. And then she says, "I went to my therapist and told her." I mean, I don't know the detailed background of the case in terms of documentation and other witnesses, but who is this therapist? Can the therapist back this up? And why did she even have a therapist? Why did Amber Heard have a therapist in the first place? Now, I haven't been watching a lot of the news coverage of this case, so I don't know, maybe there's some bits of information in the background that I've not known about, but that's, just going by the testimony itself. Who is the therapist and why did she even have a therapist? She talks about Johnny Depp apologising, and she says something about he brought me over cases of expensive wine that I could never afford. And she's shaking her head a lot as she does this. The shaking the head thing is interesting. She seems to do this in several points in the testimony. Sometimes when people are lying and they know they're lying, sometimes a giveaway is that people sort of shake their head as they're speaking, and it's almost like there's a subconscious acknowledgement of this is bullshit. You know, if you just talk to somebody in general, if you say something to them, and if a person gives like very light head nods, that tends to be an unconscious expression of agreement. I mean, there can sometimes be head shaking during the description of an extremely painful memory because the person is trying to block it out. They want to deny it. You know, no, it didn't happen. I don't want it to happen. I don't want to think about this. So sometimes people shake their heads talking about a very painful memory. But she's actually talking about him bringing over cases of expensive wine that she could never afford. And again, that puts in the thing of, you know, he's rich and I'm not rich and I'm vulnerable because I've got not much money or something like that. Yeah, the shaking of the head there, that triggered my lie detector thing a little bit. And then at 1 minute and 6, she gets asked, you know, you chose to stay in the relationship. As she pauses and gives an exaggerated trauma response. Yeah, you know, again, it just felt like she was trying to force some emotion into that, but still no proper tears. At about 1 hour and 8 minutes, she gives a strange description of her intense love with Johnny Depp. You know, while the abuse was going on, and at the times when it was good, it was so amazing. But she gives this weird description. We'd go back to good loving, like sick romantic love, like kind, sweet, velvety love. Sick romantic love. I don't know, it's just a very strange term. So she describes all that and then she laughs and says it sounds corny. And yeah, it does sound corny. At about 1 hour and 8 minutes and 30 seconds, she starts describing more accusations regarding the auditions, saying that Johnny Depp was jealous and accusing her of seeing people when she went to auditions and stuff. And she talks about him punching the walls next to her head. And she doesn't talk about that happening as a single experience. She talks about that as a regular thing. I think this is an actual quote I've written here. Quote, more accusations regarding the auditions than the punching of the walls next to my head, which was constant at that time in 2012, end quote. The constant punching of the wall next to my head. As a general description of a series of events, it seems wrong. Why would she back up against the wall so that he could punch the wall next to her head again and again and again? It seems wrong. Or something else, the trauma that she expresses or acts during this testimony, if she's got a therapist, then why does she still appear traumatized when she talks about it? Surely the therapist would have helped her to deal with that stuff after all this time. At about 1 hour and 9 minutes, she starts talking about her reactions to this apparent abuse, and she says that he would push me or shove me down and I'd get back up. And this would happen several times. It happened over and over. And she says that's why I'm not more specific, because she's talking about a general pattern of experiences. I think it would have been better if she just concentrated on one particular bad event and described it in thorough physical detail so that it was accurate and convincing. And she says, I made a point of getting up and looking him in the eye. That was my way of defending myself. It seems a bit weird to just get up and look him in the eye. That's an antagonistic thing to do. When people are being bullied, they tend not to stare back in the face of the bullier. If a person's being defensive and they're getting bullied, they tend to turn their eyes away to stare straight back at them. You know, if you get knocked down by a bully, if you get straight back up and you look them right in the eye, that's not a defense. That's a defiance. So that struck me as wrong. And then he'd ask me if I wanted to go again and shove me back down, and eventually he'd just hit me. And when she uses the word just, this is interesting. I mean, I've noticed often when people are trying to describe something that is not quite honest, they will use the word just. It was just like this. Okay? Of course, this doesn't mean that every time somebody uses the word just, it means they're lying. And Sometimes people just use the word just, don't they? And I'm sure I use it from time to time as well. But when she says, oh, he just hit me, it's almost like she's struggling to hold the narrative together. But what she really wants to get across is this image into our minds of Johnny Depp hitting her. And she just wants that to stick. Yeah? See, I've just used the word just myself. I just used it twice. This is a bit like the Monty Python and the Holy Grail with the knights who say, the knights who can't hear the word it. And they keep saying it themselves. Yeah, so when somebody uses the word just in the middle of a description of an event where they're lying, it's often a way of trying to cover up for the fact that they can't explain all the details of the lie. So they will say, it's just like this. So yeah, eventually he just hit me. So she goes on to describe more things, being pulled by the arm, having him scream in her face, smashing things around her, constantly accusing her of things, backhanding her in the face, backhanded slaps, and says that she was constantly walking on eggshells. And yeah, there are real abuse cases where that happens, and those people live a very traumatic life. So she's talking about that. But that sounds like... Well, the thing is, most of these events, from what I've seen from the 3 hours that I've looked at, most of these supposed violent events, there's very conveniently never any witnesses. Now, sure, there are some abusive relationships where the abuser does keep it private and is able to control themselves to the point where they only do it when there's no witnesses. But she also describes that Johnny would often be drunk or high on various drugs. If he was drunk or high on various drugs, then that kind of goes against the idea that he would have the common sense to only do the abuse when there were no witnesses. Yeah, I think someone who's drunk or high would be more likely to actually do the abuse in front of other people. So if that was the case, I would expect there to be witnesses to these various bits of behaviour. And maybe there is in the case. I don't know. I haven't looked at that yet. If there is, feel free to tell me in the comments section. Okay, yeah, this one actually made me laugh because I could not visualise what the hell she was talking about. She describes repetitive slaps that he would hold me in position and slap me multiple times in a row. That's just after 1 hour and 12 minutes into the first video of the testimony. Now I was trying to visualise that. How can you hold somebody in place and slap them repeatedly? So he'd have to grab her. You'd have to grab her like that, by there, or grab her by the arm, and whichever he does, he'd have to grab and then, I couldn't quite visualise that. There's no description of her trying to resist. If someone's got hold of you and they're slapping you repeatedly, at the very least, you'd be trying to duck away or something like that. You'd be trying to pull off. But the way she describes it is almost like as if she was a rag doll. He just grabbed her and she just stood there and let him slap her again and again. So in the cross-examination, I want to see some questions about that. I want to see the other counsel, the other lawyer for Depp. I want to see that lawyer ask, can you describe to me physically exactly how this happened and exactly how you responded? Show me the exact positions. Right. And then she goes on, and I think this is maybe at the 1 hour 14 or 1 hour 15 minute mark. My defense was I'd go to some other place. But she also said that her defense was to stand up and look him in the eye. So if somebody's being verbally and physically abusive to you, you can't stand up and look them in the eye after they've hit you, which is an act of defiance, and at the same time mentally go away to some other place. That's a complete contradiction. If you're going to mentally go away to some other place when there's an abuser there, you would not look at the abuser. You want them out of your line of sight, so that you could pretend they weren't there. About 1 hour and 17 minutes, she goes on and talks about, I told my therapist. Again, the therapist thing comes up. I'm not sure exactly who this therapist is and whether they're going to be a witness in the case. and I told my mom. But the thing is, I mean, telling the family is not... I don't generally consider people who tell my mom to be a reliable sort of source. I mean, you know, the Leaving Neverland footage, you had the family members all being convinced by Safe Chuck and... what was his name? Wade something or other. They had all the family all persuaded that this abuse had happened and stuff. But that, you know, the interviews with those family members didn't really belong in the Leaving Neverland film because they never personally witnessed any abuse. All they can do is say that, oh, this person claimed it happened to me. So I don't know. I'd have to see some testimony from the therapist and the mother about that kind of stuff, and maybe some physical evidence, preferably some physical evidence to go with it. So we've got about an hour and 18 minutes, coming up to an hour and 19 minutes. There's a pause in the proceedings where the lawyers take some time to just talk to the judge, and the audio is switched off. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier on, but throughout this testimony, I found that when Amber is being questioned about these apparently traumatic events, then you get the expression of, oh, I'm so traumatized just thinking about it. But when there's a pause in the case and the lawyers go and talk to the judge, Amber just seems to switch back to being just calm, blank and vacant. I don't see any tears. I mean, you would think that during the testimony she would be trying to hide the emotion. You know, a person who's been genuinely traumatized, when you ask them to describe the trauma, they tend to try and hide the emotional expression of the trauma. They try to bottle it up, and it shows. And if she was genuinely expressing traumatic memories, I would expect that when the court takes a short break, in those moments, I would expect on at least a couple of occasions during this testimony for Amber Heard to sort of, you know, maybe sink her face into her hands and just do some of that intense crying and expressing of intense uncontrollable emotion that she has been trying to hide during the actual testimony. Do that and then try and regain composure so that she can carry on. But no, on this moment, and again throughout the testimony, from what I've seen in the first 3 hours, as soon as she's not being asked questions, she just goes right back to blank expressions, which to me strongly suggests that a lot of the emotional aspects of her testimony are an act. At about 1 hour and 22 minutes, maybe 1 hour and 23, Amber is asked, when did you first confide in your mother? And she gives right eye-accessing cues to her right, which to me suggests that she's struggling to make up a memory. And there's a bit of a weird description where at one point, I think it was slightly earlier, a minute or two earlier, she says, I spoke to my mom because she would understand these dynamics. And she, from what I remember, she kind of described that as if the abuse had been going on for a while, and eventually she went to her mother and described it to her. But then a couple of minutes later, when she's asked, when did you first go to your mother? She does the right eye access and cues thing, and then she says, I did so from the beginning. So which was it? Did she suffer abuse for quite a while first and then went to her mother? Or did she tell her mother about it all right from the beginning of when the abuse started? I hope the cross-examination takes that one up as well. Her excuse is given around about maybe 1 hour and 24 minutes. Excuse for not telling her friends about the abuse. Johnny told me no one would believe me and I'd get blamed for his splitting with his partner. Now, it's very convenient that she has an excuse that she wasn't telling any of her friends about the so-called abuse at the time. It's a very convenient way of there not being evidence. And shortly after that, she's being asked a little bit more about her mother. And it's like she's struggling to come up with more story about the mother thing. So she kind of switches that away to try and focus on the emotional content of Johnny's rage. And actually at this point, I think it's important to say that I know sometimes you get people in a witness stand where they've got some sort of a dodgy lawyer who knows that the person is lying and knows that the person is going to be lying in the witness stand, and they might work with the lawyer to try and find ways of making that testimony more convincing. And you have the attorney-client privilege, so publicly we never really get to know about that kind of stuff. But yeah, that privacy between the lawyer and the person they're representing, it does allow for lawyers to basically say, look, we can lie about this. Now, I'm not saying that all lawyers are like that. There's good and bad in all. I've met plenty of lawyers, and some of them were great, some of them were terrible. But the impression I'm getting here is that if Amber Heard is making most of this stuff up and lying about it, I suspect that her legal team don't quite realise it. I suspect that she's been putting the act on for them, to persuade them, as well as doing so in the witness box. Because sometimes people lie to their lawyers about things that have happened in order to get the lawyer to represent them the way they want to be represented. Whereas if they've been truthful with the lawyer would be like, look, this ain't going to work. That happens. And I suspect that that's been happening with this case, because there are times where she's being questioned in this initial testimony where she seems to be thrown off track by questions from her own counsel. Right, okay, so there's quite a lot here, isn't there? All right, so I did a lot of stuff on part 2 of the video. I'll try and speed this one up and just concentrate on things that I think are important, because some of it's repetitive. There's more of the right eye access and cues thing. In fact, that one comes in quite strongly at the beginning of part 2. She's asked about her relationship with Johnny Depp in the early months of 2013, and she goes right eye access and cues immediately, and then goes into all this stuff about him being an addict and abusive. I think I'll also just mention at this point as well that it's weird how a person's face, a natural face, plays a role in these kinds of things. We have like movie stars who are often movie stars basically because they have a certain type of very interesting face. You've got like, say, somebody like Clint Eastwood with a very unique face, and just his face alone is so interesting to watch on screen. He looks so unusual. And like with Amber Heard, I mean, she's pretty, she's attractive, she had all these roles in these movies. I think she's a good-looking woman. But she seems to have this natural sort of sullen expression. Some women are pretty in a way that looks vulnerable. And she has that. She has like a vulnerable-looking prettiness, which I think that comes off as being kind of deceptive. I'm not saying she deliberately does like that, but she just naturally seems to have a very pretty, sullen-looking face, which kind of suits her well for playing the victim, if that's what she's doing here. So a few minutes into part 2, she's talking about she's still madly in love with Johnny Depp, despite all of his descriptions of abuse and being hurt and stuff like that. I don't really believe that. I tend to perceive that people who stay in abusive relationships mainly stay there because they're fucking terrified of what the person is going to do if they leave. I suppose maybe there are some people who maintain an I'm in love delusion. Okay, so what else we got here? Stuff about Johnny Depp trying to burn a painting with a lighter. I don't know if the physical evidence exists for that. Some stuff is presented about texts about a book called Disco Bloodbath, and Johnny texts, is this about Friday night? And that apparently is supposed to refer to some violence that she'd experienced. But, that could refer to all kinds of things. That could refer to, I don't know, a horror movie they watched. There could be a lot of things that could be a reference to Friday night, with a Disco Bloodbath book title being some sort of reference to it. That's too vague to take as actual evidence of some specific event. I think it is anyway. Maybe a lawyer would think differently. She says that Johnny phoned her friend in Spain and screamed at them. accusations against him, but that the friend couldn't speak English. And that's kind of convenient, isn't it? Because that seems to suggest that there isn't going to be a witness from Spain who can say, oh yeah, I received a phone call from Johnny Depp and he ranted and raved at me down the phone and accused me of things. I'm assuming she also speaks Spanish there as well. If the guy didn't speak English and he was her friend, does she speak Spanish? And if she does, let's hear some. This is a good one. Maybe 10 minutes into part 2, he backhands me and he wears a lot of rings and my lip went into my teeth. However, I mean, we can see that Johnny Depp wears a lot of rings. Even sitting in the courtroom, he's got a ton of rings on, you know. So yeah, if he was going to punch or slap somebody and he's got all those rings on, yeah, it could do damage, and it probably would. But she's already described being hit by him many, many times over the years. Where were the rings then? I mean, did he used to like take them off so that he could hit her? And why did he leave them on this occasion? That's something of a contradiction. I mean, that's probably something I would ask about her. Ask her about this in the cross-examination. You know, on all those early occasions when he hit you, was he wearing any rings? And if she says, oh yeah, he was wearing rings, then you could say, well, you've described that it didn't physically hurt. Well, you never received any actual injuries from it. And she describes that when he hit me and he had the rings on and it cut my lip, it got a bit of blood on the wall. And then she says, it's that simple. This is a weird one. Remember I said about when somebody's telling a fake story and they want it to come off as convincing, but they don't quite have the imagination to fill in all the details of the false memory to make it sound convincing. So they will often use the word just. Oh, it was just like this. Well, when she says it was that simple, and she did do this one time earlier in the testimony, but I forgot to make a mark of exactly when it was. This is the second time I've heard her do this in this testimony. When she says it's that simple, it seems to be a way of just trying to reduce the story down to a basic moment. I got hit, he had rings on, it cut my lip, and some blood went on the wall, and it's that simple. Don't ask me to fill in any more detail. It's that simple, you know. And she doesn't look particularly upset or traumatized as she talks about this apparent moment of being hit with the rings on and the blood. Actually, maybe she should go and write scripts for Hollywood, because the script that she seems to be given is almost as bad as a lot of modern Hollywood movies. That's quite a dig, isn't it? But yeah, what the hell? I'm going to say it. I think it's true. Okay, so about 10 minutes into part 2, or it might be 11 minutes, she starts to, sort of try and appear upset. It looks fake to me. As she describes, apparently not making a big deal out of small injuries. That almost seems like an inadvertent admission, because, the stories about her being violent to Johnny Depp, rather than him being violent to her, her making that kind of statement, not making a big deal out of small injuries, that could be an inadvertent revelation of her mindset. So yeah, she talks about not making a big deal out of small injuries and making light of it and making it a joke at the times when it happened. And yet she can't quite control her emotions while she's giving the testimony. So she could control her emotions while the trauma was happening and make light of it and make it out to be a joke, but she can't do it now. Now it's, oh my God, this is, like 10 years ago, and I'm so traumatized thinking about the memory, but when it actually happened, I was able to just laugh it off. No, contradiction. Coming up to 13 minutes of part 2, she presents, or her lawyers present a photo of her. I think she'd sent it to her mother. A photo of her with an arm bruised, and she appears to have black hair in that picture as well. It's weird. It didn't even look like hair to me, but I assume it is, because it would be pretty stupid to present a picture of somebody else. Anyway, and another weird verbal description. He got me by the arm and held me on the floor, screaming at me. I couldn't quite visualize the physicality of that. It's about 13 minutes in. And she says, I don't know how many times he hit me in the face, but I don't see any face bruises in that photo. 15 minutes into part 2, and there's another pause in the proceedings, and she's calm again. Coming up to 17 minutes in, she's talking some more about, apparently there's a painting that she had that was painted by her ex-wife, I think she called her, or previous lesbian lover. And she kept this painting, and she says Johnny was jealous about it, and maybe he was jealous about it. A lot of guys, or well, men or women, would be jealous of the partner keeping a painting by an ex-partner. I mean, I don't think it really bothered me that much, but you know, you could understand Johnny Depp being bothered about that if he was. Doesn't necessarily mean he was violent over it. So she talks about that, and you know that it would wind Johnny up and make him more aggressive, and lead to violence, and it'd have accusations and all that. So she talks about that, and yet from what she says, it sounds like she never ever took the painting down. If that painting was really triggering Johnny to be violent to her, then why didn't she just take the damn thing down and store it somewhere, or go and put it in some location, a place where he would never see it, or something? Put it up in her mother's house or something like that. I don't know, but yeah, if there's a prop like that that's present in the home that triggers a violent response, you remove the thing. The fact that she didn't, that doesn't really fit well with the story. Okay, about 22 minutes in, she weirdly tries to look like she's about to break into tears, but she's describing Johnny holding a small dog out of a moving car window. Well, that's not exactly traumatic for her. Traumatic for the animal. Her observing Johnny do something traumatic to an animal, if he even actually did that shouldn't be something that makes her break down almost into tears in a courtroom, like 10 years later. And funnily enough, she seemed to show more emotion at that dog story than she did regarding the apparent violence. And of course, regarding that dog story, I don't know if there's any other witnesses. She says there was other people in the car. I don't know if they could come forward and be witnesses. It'd be interesting to hear their point on it. And even if that did happen, wouldn't be a very good thing for Johnny Depp to do, but it wouldn't prove that he was violent to her. 25 minutes into part 2, and there's another pause in the proceedings, during which, again, she just goes back to being blank-faced. And at 26 minutes in, there's a weird photo of an apparent drug box, and some lines of cocaine and some alcoholic drinks. She describes it all as that. And I'm wondering, why was that photo taken, and why was it kept? I mean, how do we even know that's Johnny's stuff? Could be hers. It could be someone else's. I don't know. It's where exactly was that photo taken, and exactly what date, and why was it kept? And then about half an hour in, she talks about going to the desert to go to a party and do some hallucinogenic drugs. And this leads up to around about the 37-minute mark, where she starts talking about a bathroom incident that led to Johnny doing a forced cavity search of her, looking for his drugs. And she really takes the time to build into this description as if she's trying to whip up the emotion that is required to go with it to make it convincing. I mean, really, the story should be convincing in itself from its mere description of the details, along with it matching the evidence, whether the person who was on the witness stand appears traumatized or not. Again, the way she describes these supposed abuse events, it's almost like she describes herself as a lifeless ragdoll that just didn't do anything to resist. And, the forced cavity search would be almost like a form of rape. And then coming up to around the 40-minute mark, she's done a fair bit of swearing on the witness stand here, quoted as being from Johnny, but I suspect that might be her personality. She might be the type of person who actually does a hell of a lot of swearing. I think I did hear some evidence where she was arguing, some audio evidence of her fighting and arguing with Johnny. I think she did some swearing and that. She sounded very verbally aggressive. And then she kind of acts tearful about having to put an act on for friends the next day. She seems to appear more upset about having to put the act on for the friends than she does from the actual molestation of a forced cavity search. Almost done here, folks. I think I've got 2 pages of notes left. I'll just try and breeze over them. Hopefully there's not too much here. 43 minutes into part 2, another pause in the proceedings, and again she's blank-faced, doesn't appear traumatised. 45 minutes in. This, I actually, it's weird. I mean, okay, I've worked with abuse victims. I've worked with abused kids. I've worked with the abusers. Okay, I'm not blind to this stuff. I've not been the victim of domestic violence from a partner myself. I've not been sexually abused, but I have worked with people who've had that, and I've sat with people in person and had them tell me in tears and just fallen to pieces, tell me about it. I've seen that, and I've got a pretty good idea what it looks like, and I have a good strong sense of empathy. I'm the type of guy. When I watch Haley Joel Osment in that movie AI, Artificial Intelligence, where he plays the robot kid and he gets abandoned in the forest and he's crying to the mother, oh please don't leave me, don't leave me, I want to be a real boy, and all that. That scene, I mean, his acting is so good in that scene. Whenever I watch that scene, it makes me well up. I do have a good strong sense of empathy, and that's for a movie. I'm not cold-hearted when it comes to these kinds of things, abuse and trauma and things like that. But I would say I'm familiar enough with it that I do tend to be able to spot fakers better than I would have before I worked in the field. And at 45 minutes in this video, I absolutely burst into tears of laughter. It was she's describing Johnny Depp and his drunkenness and his drugs, and she's saying that he lost control of his bowels and I cleaned up after him and security did the same, and he'd pass out in his own vomit. And when she was saying all that, I found it hilarious. It looked fake the way she said it, and what she was saying was so over the top. I honestly, I was in fits of laughter at that point in the video. And when I watched the footage, I saw that Johnny Depp himself, I mean, he wasn't exaggerating, but you could see he was amused at it as well. He had this look of surprise on his face, and that made it even more funny for me. Okay, and then there's a weird slip in the language here that didn't make sense. About 46 minutes in, she talked in part 1 of the testimony about that Johnny Depp would describe, I've got this monster inside me and I'm going to put this monster away, I'm going to put this thing away. And she talked about that a lot there, and she does it again here in part 2, coming up to the 46-minute mark. And then she lets slip with a weird statement. She says, quote, "He was this thing," which is supposed to be the bad side of him. "He was this thing that made me feel so loved," end quote. He was this thing that made me feel so loved. Such a strange statement. I'd want to pin her down on that and ask her about, what the hell are you talking about? Isn't the thing supposed to be the violent side of him? And how could that make you feel so loved? And then she talks shortly after that about, I wrote letters to myself about the whole thing. Well, yeah, okay. I wrote letters to myself. Conveniently, that doesn't involve there being any witnesses. I think I'd be asking to see copies of those letters, and then I would get some forensic people to take a look at those letters and find out how old the paper is, how old the ink is. I don't know if those kinds of tests can be done. I assume that they can. 51 minutes into part 2. I'm on the last page here, by the way, so nearly done. 51 minutes into part 2. She talks about, I was against him drinking and doing coke, and yet she agreed to do MDMA with him, and she'd done it before. 53 minutes in, she's waffling about various things as she's trying to build up to tears. And she talks this weird story about the two of them convincing a flight attendant on a plane during a flight to take MDMA with them. And then that the girl was high, the flight attendant was high, and she started being physically affectionate with Amber. And then Johnny got jealous and grabbed her and threatened to break her wrist. That is such a weird story. And I'd be asking for witnesses on that one. Okay, let's have the date that this happened. Let's look at the exact flight that you were on. Let's go and talk to the staff members who were on that flight and ask them exactly what happened. And, did this girl take MDMA on the flight with them? And are there any other witnesses who were on the plane that day, who could testify as to what happened? It's just such a weird story, that one. I'm not saying it definitely didn't happen. I mean, it's so bizarre. Maybe it did happen. It seems like such a strange thing to make up. But yeah, I'd definitely be asking a lot more questions about that. Right, sorry, I'm turning this because I've got notes written on the side and stuff like that. Okay, so we're very, very nearly at the end now. 56 minutes in, he shoves me hard onto the glass table, and there's no discussion about whether that table broke or not. If it did break, you would expect her to have some severe cuts from it. He shoved me hard onto the glass table, and her lawyer doesn't ask whether the table broke. And then he whacks me in the face, which doesn't say whether it was a punch or a slap. And then she says that she had a bloody nose and the bodyguard gave her a handkerchief for a nose. Who is that bodyguard? Have we got a witness for that? I don't know. I'd be very interested to see all the documentation in this case and see how many witnesses there are for all of these supposed events. And even if that did happen, who's to say that she didn't attack him and then he was defending himself and she ended up with a bloody nose regarding that? I don't know. And a lot of people do seem to think that this was a mutually abusive relationship. Weirdly, years ago, I knew a couple who lived around here near me. And I'm not going to say any names, but I didn't know this couple too well, but I knew other people who'd been out with them. And one of my ex-girlfriends had actually been out with this guy, and another female friend of mine had actually been out with this guy. And neither of them reported any violence from this fella whatsoever. But this particular guy got into a relationship with this other girl, and the two of them were at each other, violence, really chaotic relationship. One of them, or both of them, was triggering the other, and they would really tear into each other. And yet, from what I know, both of those people, in all of the other relationships that they've had with people around this area, there was never any violence. It was just a weird chemistry thing between those two particular people. And, I wonder whether that's what's gone on with the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp situation. Yeah, okay, so, I've got a couple of other notes there, but nothing important. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on the first 3 hours of Amber Heard's testimony. I would have liked to have gone through the whole thing, but I didn't really have time for it. I'm busy writing and editing other projects, and I wanted to get this done and out there to you folks before Amber Heard's cross-examination next week. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it gives you something interesting to compare with that cross-examination when it comes out. Okay, you've been listening to Rob Ager of collativelearning.com. Subscribe if you like this kind of thing, if you're into psychology videos and body language stuff or analysis of video footage. I normally do movie analysis. If you're into any of that stuff, make sure to subscribe. I've got the website, collativelearning.com. There's tons of material there that's available that is not available on YouTube as well. So, and I've also got a Patreon where you can sign up there to become a monthly supporter. All that kind of sales spiel. There you go. I'll see you guys soon. Take it easy. Bye-bye.